Okay, everyone. So next on the main stage, we have Kevin Greene, VIB of Cleveland School of Cannabis, Michaell Fields, Social Equity and Inclusion Consultant, and Tyroe Russell, Cleveland School of Cannabis Assistant Director. Welcome, guys.
Hello?
Check,
Awesome.
check.
Hello, can you all right, awesome. Good afternoon. Happy Saturday to everyone. So my name is Kevin Greene. I am the Vice President of the Cleveland School of Cannabis, also the Harrington Institute for Cannabis Education, which is our partnership with Al Harrington of Viola Brands to continue our work to create equity through education in the cannabis industry. Our company has been around for 5 years, and we've just been very focused on how do we close the gap for individuals to be able to take advantage of what's going on. This industry is moving fast, and it's advancing very quickly. And we know that many people want to be able to take advantage, and we want to be able to provide that gateway and that bridge to be able to gain that access. So I want to allow Michaell and Ty to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get into this fireside chat.
Hi, I'm Michaell Fields. Currently, I am a consultant in the social equity, social impact space for the cannabis industry. Prior to hanging my own shingle as a consultant, I was Director of Corporate Social Responsibility for one of the major MSOs headquartered here in Chicago. My background is really in organizational development, and as Kevin said, closing the gap, making sure that both sides, both parties, whether it be an MSO or a nonprofit, are getting what they need to be successful.
Awesome, awesome. Hello, hello. My name is Tyroe Russell. I'm the president of the Cleveland School of Cannabis and also CEO of Faces International Marketing and Development Firm. My career quickly started in higher education, was in higher education for 15 years as a dean of multicultural affairs, also worked in residence life for quite a while. And as of now, I do a ton of work in the DE&I space, have been doing it for about 11 years now. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, for those of you who may not be familiar with the terminology. And doing that with a lot of corporate partners from Olympus, Olympus Cameras of America, PPL Electric Utilities, United Way, and companies of the sort. So excited to be here to have this conversation about equity in the cannabis industry and what it means to really start to break down some of those barriers that have been put up for over 100 years.
So, you know, when we think about equity, the space has been quite interesting. We understand equity is all about understanding the context, what is putting people in the position of where they are right now, what has caused the disenfranchisement, and then what do we need to do to put people in a position to be successful now, but truthfully, to be successful in the future, right? Because if we prepare people only for now, it's going to be very, very hard for them to take advantage in an industry, especially that's moving so fast. I think for me, and leading into my first question for you, Ty, is the industry right now around social equity is geared in a lot of the programs around ownership. And let me preface, as a business owner myself, entrepreneurship is a major part of who I am, and I believe is very, very important. But understanding the context is the fact that most individuals, and if we think about our white allies and our white counterparts that have built wealth, owning a business is not the way that they did that, right? Being able to have strong economic stability, being able to acquire assets over time, being able to pass that down generationally is technically the way that we've been, individuals have built wealth en masse in American culture. So my worry in thinking about what equity means to you, Tyrone, is that we're talking very heavily about license acquisition, which is the hardest and the most biggest barrier to entry when it comes to the cannabis industry, especially around THC. So for Ty, for you, what does equity look like or mean to you in the actual cannabis industry?
Oh, excellent, excellent. So for me, equity in the cannabis industry essentially looks like it's accountability, right? It's holding people accountable for what they've done to communities, what they've done to families, what they've done to brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, cousins. It's holding those folks accountable for what they've done with the war on weed, what they've done with the lies they told about it, and then what they've done when they made it the devil and then shifted and made it king and held us back, right? It's holding them accountable for what they're doing at this moment right now. So for me, equity is making sure we don't let people off the hook for what they've done in exchange for some of the crumbs that they're beginning to throw out while they continue to build these empires. So Once we start to hold folks accountable, then we can really start to make some change as long as we're not letting our foot off the gas. And one thing I would say is, it also looks like using direct language. Language is so critical, and we keep saying social equity, and rarely do we hear people say black and brown. We need black and brown ownership. As long as we keep throwing around these terms, people can avoid it, right? But when we're specific about what we need to accomplish, when we say this is what you're giving to these people, we start to make that change. But right now, it's just a lot of lofty goals and a lot of conversation that means nothing from my perspective.
You know, I love that. I think it's a great segue to Mike. So when we think about that, right, being specific and accountability, right, because you don't gain equity without accountability. So, Mike, from your perspective, obviously you spent some time working for a top MSO. You've done a lot of work in the industry. Where have we been successful in this mission to create equity so far, from your perspective, or have we been? And are there any examples?
In my opinion, we haven't really been successful. There's a lot of efforts that I'll call it window dressing. MSOs, organizations are out there saying that they are providing social equity, but what does that exactly mean? Throwing money at underserved communities, funding nonprofits who may be doing work to serve those underserved communities. That's not really doing anything. That is just putting money out there, and hopefully it's being spent well. So I think we're doing well in terms of talking about it, but the actual action that is needed and that I've seen in the industry, it's not taking place. To get us there, we need to start talking about it and understanding, what does social equity mean? What does social impact mean? And in my experience with the MSOs and my counterparts at other MSOs, where we've fallen down is we're not asking these communities, what do you need? What does social equity mean to you? Because it's going to mean something different in every community. Just even here in Chicago, South Side, West Side, North Side, it means something different. So instead of just writing a big check to an organization or going out and doing employee engagement, they should be going out and having sessions like this and asking questions, asking leaders in the community, how do we provide you what you need? And asking that question over and over again, and then getting the feedback from them. Are we being successful? Why we are successful? And if not, how do we close that gap?
Yeah, I love that, because that is something that intersects with our nonprofit system currently right now, right? The first thing I hear when you say that is the fact that we need to do a needs assessment, right? Equity means something different to everyone. And when we just throw dollars at certain things, what we're doing is we're coming from a savior mentality, right? I know what you need, this is what I did, so let me go ahead and toss it at you, and this is what's going to get you there, without understanding the context of why the person is there, their lived experiences, and what it's going to take to actually build them up and actually get them to a place. So thinking about that, right, and I believe accountability for equity is on both sides, right? So from the minority, black, brown populations, what misconceptions, Mike, do you think right now, or do you feel right now, that individuals have about the cannabis industry?
That's a hard question, because again, it's going to be different. So I'll tell you from my perspective and the lens. So, and I'll talk specifically about Chicago with the licenses for dispensaries. So you have your social equity licenses that are being held up now. I don't know who's from Chicago or not, but the misconception is people who are applying for licenses and they are lucky enough to get a license in the lottery, they think they've, that's it, they're lucky enough to get the license. What I'm seeing is they haven't educated themselves on what is it actually going to take to get your dispensary up and running. They haven't educated themselves on the process once you get the license. And there are a lot of organizations out there that are educating, but they are trying to educate like a cookie cutter approach. Here's what you need to know. Well, everyone's experience and knowledge level is going to be different. So you're just throwing the information out there and hopefully it's sticking. And what I've seen is the people who are getting these licenses are not, a majority of them, are not educated on the entire business process. It's not over when you get the license. You may be a year away, you know, $2-3 million investment away from opening your doors and even, you know, making a single cent. And that is what is not being shared, either by the state of Illinois or by the MSOs. It's just, here, have a license, and if you don't get it, you're gonna probably have to sell it to an MSO. So it starts a bad cycle over and over again. So education is lacking, knowledge is lacking, and it doesn't have to be education and knowledge coming from someone that's been in the cannabis industry. There are a lot of community colleges. Kevin and Ty's organization, Cleveland School of Cannabis, these are organizations that are trying to help educate, you know, everyone, but specifically gearing it towards the black and brown individuals in our communities to provide them with the tools to be successful. Whether you're going to own a dispensary, whether you're going to have a grow or an auxiliary business, you know, you need to understand where this is going, where you are, and how you plug into the industry.
You know, so with that, so Ty, how can and how is education currently right now helping closing the gap when it comes to equity, specifically around black and brown populations and minority populations?
So let me I just want to address something that you were talking about a minute ago before I get to that question. When it comes to major organizations or corporations coming into the community and saying, what do you need? That's powerful, right? It's saying we don't have the answers. You're smarter than us about your pain. You're an expert. Teach us, right? So that's cool. But one thing I think about a lot of these organizations is, if you understand the nonprofit industrial complex, right, you understand that the organizations that are causing the issues then turn around and donate money to a nonprofits that's fighting the issues that they're causing, right? So it's like, okay, I'm not going to pay my workers enough, right? So now they're in poverty, but then I'll donate money to an anti-poverty agency in our neighborhood. Pay them the wage, right? So part of the conversation that we should be having in the cannabis industry is how are we recreating the nonprofit industrial complex in the space that we have the opportunity to demolish that, right? So now we have these companies saying we're going to donate money to a community that we're harming, we're not hiring, and we're going to give you money, and then, you know, that's it. It's like you're causing the issues. Let's deal with those issues versus you just getting the tax write-off for it, right? So I need to say that because I think it's critical as we start to come up with these nonprofits, how we are becoming part of that system where we're allowing people to do things to us and then give us money to say, hey, we're sorry, here you go on about your business. I was talking to someone the other day. Women have been complaining about sports for the past 15, 20 years about not being recognized, right? They were in ESPN's face saying, we need to be recognized. You need to put us on mainstream TV. What did ESPN do? They invented ESPNW for women. So they said, we aren't changing our system, but we'll give you something on the side. You're not coming mainstream, but we'll give you something on the side. And people gave it a round of applause. I'm like, we didn't change the problem. They just shifted over here, and we gave them a round of applause, and they'll probably win an award for it, so on and so forth. But we didn't change the system. So back to education. What we're doing at the Cleveland School of Cannabis, and the reason why we're at the Cleveland School of Cannabis, it goes back to what you said earlier. We continue to preach ownership in the cannabis industry. We don't do a good job telling people that you can actually work in the industry and work your way up into ownership. So we're trying to tell everyone the only way to get into the cannabis industry is to own something. And while that's cool, I feel like we're leaving an entire community behind who can simply start to work in the industry on the ground floor somewhere and then work their way through an organization and begin to make those connections. So I think information, if we're talking about information exchange, information is critical, and that's why they keep it away from us. Because the more we learn, the more we know, the more we can do, not necessarily the more we do, but the more we can do. So the power in a school like Cleveland School of Cannabis or Harrington Institute or anyone out there who's providing education is to tell people that the more you know, the more equipped you're going to be to enter into this field from whatever direction you want to enter in from. And it doesn't have to be from an ownership perspective.
No, I appreciate that. You know, when we think about the more we know, I like that statement. Every time we pass legislation, right, it's a big hurrah, especially as we move closer to rec nationally and federal legalization. The one area that I feel gets kind of lost in it, especially thinking about equity, is opportunity to access, right, and the amount of opportunities available, right? The cannabis industry right now, in the sense of when we think about just the THC market, is a limited space, because in most states, licenses are limited, right? Only Oklahoma right now, I think, has unlimited licenses, but I don't think that's going to work out really great in the market as it continues to mature. So a state goes ahead and says, we're going to do rec. But then what happens is towns and cities have the ability to opt out. And I don't think that's I don't think that conversation is bubbling up to the top that it needs to be, because I think about this. If we go ahead and said, yes, we're going to rec, and now the laws are going to create less barriers to entry, but then 70% of the towns and the cities in the state opt out, how, Mike, do you feel that's affecting true level of equity in the cannabis industry if there's now an industry that's already limited, and then on top of it, the systems that are already in play, townships, cities, that have the power structure to now to be able to keep the roadblocks and block that out? How do you think that's affecting equity overall and limiting the opportunities?
Well, it's impacting it, because if you are in a town or in a community that doesn't have, the ability to have a dispensary on the rec side, and you live and work and you want to work in that town, but you don't have that ability to do so, then what's the option? You go to the next town, okay? Or you go to another state. If you're here in Illinois, Indiana's just over the border, Michigan, So by limiting, it's like pushing water uphill with a rake. You're trying to make sure that everyone, it's a level playing field, but giving people or towns the ability to opt out, it's really it's sucking money out of that community. So for whatever reason, and we ran into this when I was working at the organization, when you go to a town meeting, the first thing that a lot of people say is look at the dollar signs. Look at the revenue that's going to be generated that you can pump back into your community. Well, that's not what they're worried about. They're worried about the kids, the negative effect that cannabis is going to have in their community because it's a gateway drug. So instead of going in and leading with the dollar, you need to go in and lead with the education, lead with the knowledge. You need to visit, in the black and brown communities, visit the churches, educate the people in the churches of what's going on, particularly for health, for CBD reasons. My parents, when I started working in the cannabis industry, they thought I was nuts. But when I started to educate them on the industry, the health benefits, and then how large the industry is going to be in 5 and 10 years, they're like, okay, Michael, go ahead. Yeah, it makes sense. And by the way, get me some CBD because my arthritis is kicking up. So I think that states need to do a better job of educating their communities before they decide to go rec. And that process should start 2 years, 3 years before, because nothing changes overnight. And the more runway we have to educating and getting people comfortable with the industry and the benefits, and then you can go to the revenue, I think that we'll be in a better situation.
No, I love that, and think about that, right? Because the whole thing with equity is like you can't really accomplish it, as Tyrone first said, without using the correct language and being very direct. And you can't accomplish it without being purposeful, right? And that strategy of saying, you know what? Rec is on the way, right? Because at the end of the way, any state that's medical is going rec eventually, right? And that's the first step to say, hey, we've now acknowledged that we have conditions that we feel are qualifying conditions, and cannabis can be a part of their wellness toolkit to help them be able to go ahead and get the wellness that they're looking for. We should, again, at that point, as you said, start to educate our communities, because what it's doing to communities that are not educated, they're making decisions based on a lack of facts, misinformation, and technically the best marketing campaign that the world has ever seen. The war on drugs and what they've done with cannabis is the best marketing campaign ever, because even though that we're in a legal situation, it is still effective today at the end of the day. So it is by far the best marketing campaign ever. So when we think about that, Tyrone, right, in the sense of what we have to accomplish, what we have to overcome, how we have to be purposeful, right? what we have to do in the sense of reimagining how we interact and how cannabis will be a part of the social fabric of our lives. How important do you think relationships are to this process to actually being able to get us to our goals?
Ooh, yes, I love it. Relationships. Everyone talks about how important relationships are, right? And that's no difference here. I think if we're talking about social equity, and I'll continue to use that term because it's the term that everyone understands in the industry, I think the relationships that Black and brown folks have with the leaders of the industry, whatever, is super important because it can start to create this space where people see the humanity of Black and brown people. And I think that's what they miss, is the humanity. So when we pass policies, we pass procedures, it's just technical stuff because you still don't see the humanity, so you're not going to apply it to those folks, and you're not going to follow it because you'll find ways around it. We need folks to see humanity, right? When they build these relationships, see the humanity the way they see it in the white suburbs when folks start overdosing, right? They approach that situation with love, care, and concern and saying, we want to help you because we see you. We have relationships with you. You're my son, you can be my daughter, you can be my brother, you can be my father, you can be my mother. I lost someone to an overdose, right? So they have that connection. But when it comes to understanding Black and brown, right, white folks don't have that. They don't see the humanity in us. So nothing we're going to put on paper is going to change that. What changes that is getting in real, genuine relationship with people, right? Seeing them for who they are, understanding that we're dynamic human beings. We have good days, we have bad days, we have great days, we have on days, we have off days. Sometimes we use language that's not words, sometimes we use language. They have to see everything about us to say, you know what? This is a person, and I want to do better because I understand how people are supposed to be treated, right? But they don't see us as that just yet, right? We're a roadblock, we're a hurdle in the industry. We're someone who says, hey, you need to change this, and they say, no, we don't. And if the state decides to do it, we're going to sue the state for seeing your humanity and how we disrupted your community, right? So relationships are critical because it allows us to see people for people, right? And I think that's what we need in this industry.
Awesome. 100%. So Mike, I want to end off this last question with you. So from your perspective, man, what advice would you provide to someone right now as they're starting to assess the industry, recondition their mind, take some chances? We're all at a different point of the roadmap in our careers, our life, what we're looking for in a sense of our passions. What advice would you provide someone as they're going through that assessment and those honest conversations with themselves about pursuing any layer, employment, entrepreneurship, CBD, THC side, legislation, advocacy, ancillary businesses, because I always say this is an industry, and sometimes we get a little bit lost in the direct plant touching side of it. Myself, Tyrone and Michael as well don't come from the cannabis industry or the legacy market, but we've been able to directly translate our skills. We always say, hey, we're doing what we do every single day and what we've done in our careers for the last few decades, but now our content is cannabis, right? And our skill sets have put us in this position. What advice would you give to these individuals looking to take the next step and a chance, truthfully, on themselves?
I think the first thing is kind of do a look inward, a skills assessment of what you do and what you do well, and what is your passion. Because what I see is a lot of people, particularly people getting dispensary license, they get into it and then they're like, well, I don't know how to balance a checkbook. I don't know how to do marketing, and then they have to go out and find people who can do that. So even if you look at like all of these people in the expo hall, you look at the brands, you look at how they're communicating. There are people that know how to do that. Consumer packaged good companies. If you are in a CBG company and you're trying to get into the industry, say, how do I plug in? What does this industry need? Because everyone has a skill set. And if you really look at this as a business, take cannabis away from it and just say, this is a business. What does a business need to run to be successful? They need communicators, they need marketers, they need accountants. They need every single thing that it's going to take to run a McDonald's franchise. It's business. So just because it is an upward trajectory of being a multi-billion-dollar business doesn't mean you can just jump in and the money's going to be stuck, you're stuffing your pockets with money, because you need to be skilled at something. And that's how you should kind of view, what do I want to be? Do I have the tools to get there? And if you don't, go back to school. Go to Cleveland School of Cannabis. There are a lot of organizations that will tell you what you need in order to be successful. And if you take cannabis off of it, it's just like being, working for a Fortune 500 company. You've got a finance degree, there's a place for you in the cannabis industry. If you've got a marketing degree, there's a place for you. You just need to understand what they're looking for and how you plug in. And if you don't have the skill set or the tools in your toolbox, go out and acquire them. It's not too late. The business, we've referred to it as an industry. I call it a business. It's not an industry yet. It is a business. So if you get in now with a unique skill set, start your own business, join a company, take your skill set, be a unique individual, but educate yourself and just, have the knowledge of where you want to go and how you want to be successful. Then you go to the business and say, okay, here I am, interview them. Not for you. There are a lot of other ones around. So that would be my recommendation.
No, I appreciate that. And I want to thank, Michael and Tyrone for joining me on the panel. In closing for me, the main thing that I truthfully want to end with is the fact that we must not limit our minds around what is happening. As Mike said, right, you have skills right now that are needed in the cannabis industry and this cannabis business that's being built. Really, for us to truthfully be able to go ahead and build equity as a pillar of the growth of this industry, we must making sure that, one, we're in strong relationships with each other. We're opening in our world, combating the biases that we hold, not only to cannabis, but truthfully the things that we do and the biases that we carry in the world every single day. And don't allow ourselves to have blinders on. We are in a time where the world is changing. We get to take some chances right now. We get to push norms. The pandemic, at the end of the day, no matter where you fall on it, basically stopped the entire world and said, we are changing. So we are in an opportunity in a space right now, especially in the next couple of years, as we reallocate and reassess and re-synergize in the sense of what we're going to be over the next few decades. We get an opportunity to push it. And if we're truthfully committed to the process of equity, we have to change norms. Because the norms right now is the fact that we have never lived in an equitable and just system ever. That is something that we're trying to achieve. So we must do everything that we possibly can to utilize this space and time right now and utilize the cannabis industry to go ahead and be a beacon and an example of how equity truthfully can be accomplished, and that we can bleed that into other areas of our life and truthfully get that. So I appreciate everyone in their time. Thank you again to the panel, and enjoy the rest of the expo, and enjoy your weekend as well.